I would see patients sell their land, their cows, all their property to access care, and sometimes it was still not enough.
I think the continent for the longest time has been walking around with a begging bowl.
Right.
And when you beg, really there's no dignity in poverty.
I remember I got 2 jobs heavily pregnant. In fact, I remember I did my interview for the deputy county director. I did the interview on a Thursday and I was delivering on a Monday. And I was given the news that I got the job, while I was on maternity leave.
You're a medical doctor.
Yes.
So walk us through your career journey. Where did it begin, and how did you decide to switch from being a medical doctor to health systems?
To be honest, when I say medical doctor, I feel a little bit like a fraud because I don't see patients. So I think between me and a witch doctor, there's a very small difference.
Welcome to Rewire with Rose, a podcast where we discuss leadership, mindset, and everything else in between. In the studio today, we have the amazing Dr. Anne Musuva. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you.
Yeah, so let's get started with an intro to get to know you. Who is Anne?
So thank you, Rose, for having me here. My name is Anne Musuva. I'm a health system specialist, a medical doctor. I'm a mentor, a coach, and I'm also a board director on several boards.
Thank you, Anne. So, just to what you said, you're a medical doctor.
Yes.
So walk us through your career journey. Where did it begin, and how did you decide to switch from being a medical doctor to health systems?
To be honest, when I say medical doctor, I feel a little bit like a fraud because I don't see patients. So I think between me and a witch doctor, there's a very small difference on a light note. But I think my career towards medicine, I would say, started in high school, where I took a really keen interest in the sciences. So in biology, in chemistry, I really enjoyed them. And I did very well in high school. And as is typical in Kenya, and I'm sure many other countries, when you really do well in high school, there are sort of certain courses that, you're encouraged to do. So I had straight A's in high school, and I was encouraged, to do medicine, engineering, architecture. For me, engineering was out of the question. Architecture was out of the question. I did not enjoy physics at all, although I did physics and did well, but I didn't really enjoy it. I'm not a very, let me say, practical, hands-on person, if you may. And so I think that's how I ended up doing medicine. I'd say largely because of my grades and my interest in science. But then after high school, we typically had 2 years in between high school and university then. And my parents took me to Strathmore, it was Strathmore College then, now Strathmore University, to pursue a course in IT. It was called IMIS, Management of Information Systems at that time.
Days.
Yes, and it had different components on IT, programming, information sciences, financial methods, quantitative methods, and so on. And so I really, really enjoyed that program. And there was one particular course on financial and quantitative methods where I got a gold medal. So basically, I was the best in the world in that particular subject.
Oh.
And I wasn't like trying to do that. I was just studying as I always did. And that's the first time I thought, perhaps should I do something else? Because I really enjoyed, the financial accounting, cost accounting, and all that sort of stuff. And my dad asked me, Anne, should you be going to do medicine, or should you be going to do, business and finance courses and so on? And that's the first time I actually really thought about it, because I had not done business studies in high school. I dropped them in Form 2, so I had not done that till the end. So that had not really been an option for me, but I really enjoyed studying that, and I'm very good with numbers, and it's just something that I really enjoy. And then I asked around different people for advice. I was this young, impressionable girl, and nobody advised me to do BCom. You have straight A's, you have to do medicine. I think in hindsight now, and even how I bring up my children, I really try to look at what they are really good at and what they would excel naturally at. I think it's increasingly, I see schools moving in that direction, and also many parents, where we really try to nurture a child based on their own interests instead of just based on their grades. I wouldn't say I have regrets doing medicine, but I think I would also really have enjoyed doing finance. And perhaps that's in a way where I veered towards health financing.
Yeah.
It's something that was always close. So actually, that's how I ended up in health financing. So, so I did my medical school. After medical school, I worked as a medical doctor in Chogoria Hospital, which was a mission hospital. And then in Boni Hospital, I ended up managing a level 4 hospital. I worked as a district medical officer. And I think that's a lot of how my leadership skills were nurtured. Because as a district medical officer of health, you have all these health facilities within the district that you're in charge of, and trying to improve the health of the population, but also make sure that all the health facilities are running and are running well. They are well staffed. The staff are well motivated. You have the supplies you need, and so on. And then, so after working there for a while, I I I remember, especially in Bonn, which was a public facility, I remember us many times lacking, for example, some of the supplies that we needed and so on, and not having enough resources to make sure that the facility was adequately stocked. And so I think very early on in my career, I started realizing that, beyond my knowledge as a medical doctor, there were factors outside that influenced how the sort of care that I gave to my patients, right? Like, for example, the number of staff that we had, the resources that we had, and so on. So I started realizing that there were other issues beyond my own skills that influenced how the whole health facility ran. And that really was my introduction into health systems. I didn't call it that then, but I realized that there was something broken about the system, and I felt more compelled to be part of efforts to sort that. And so after working there for a while, I moved to PSI. I wanted to move back to Nairobi. I was getting married. My husband was in Nairobi. So that was also a big determinant for me moving to PSI. But I ended up working there for over 10 years, and I had a really, really great time doing so. But even still, when I was at PSI, I kept on thinking about the health system, the public health system, about health financing, my love for numbers and for all matters finance. And that's how I eventually gravitated to health financing. I did a postgraduate diploma in health economics from London School, from the University of Cape Town.
Yeah.
And really cemented my, I think, my knowledge in health financing and health economics.
All right. And now you are a force. I understand where the history comes from for health financing, because now you are a non-expert in the space.
Thank you.
On health finance.
I wouldn't say I'm an expert. We're always learning every day.
Yeah.
I do know quite a bit, but there's still a lot that I'm learning every single day.
Yeah. But it's my kudos to you. That's how I know you as a health financing specialist.
Thank you.
So you see how, I like the point that you brought up there, that often with children, when they're being advised about careers, it's the grades that inform the career vis-a-vis the interests of the child. So I think it's critical, but look at how the dots worked. Looking backward, it connected.
Exactly.
So then you went to PSI to do...
I started off in PSI managing a malaria program. So this was it was actually a program that I launched from start. It was on HIV prevention. We started off in a few districts, a few provinces, expanded. That time we had the provinces. So we expanded to 3 provinces. I started off in Coast, Western, and Nyanza, and eventually to the whole country. And I think that's really my first exposure with sort of programming in this development space. I eventually went on to manage malaria programs. I was promoted to be a director for malaria and child health, malaria and maternal and child health. I also managed a big USAID project, a $42 million project as a project director. And I left PS Kenya as the deputy country director. So, I mean, my time at PS Kenya, I would say, is where I learned a lot in terms of management and leadership. I was also really blessed with really amazing bosses who also appreciated the efforts that I brought on board, who, guided me and also mentored me, into taking on more leadership roles. Eventually.
Okay. And when you reflect back, considering that, your expertise was growing in this space, Did you struggle at all with taking on management and leadership, or did it just come as a natural?
I wouldn't say I struggled. Um, I don't think I would say I struggled, but of course there were challenges. I remember in the very first management role that I had there, managing a certain HIV program. So this was a USAID funded project. The deliverables were really tight, and we had to launch and scale up to the entire country in a pretty short time. So, really tight deliverables. But I think also looking back, my nature is that I'm very results driven. And so I remember my very first appraisal with my boss, and she gave me some feedback that I didn't quite agree with. I was told I'm too tough. Yes, I want things done, but I'm coming off too tough on people, and that's not it's not having the desired effect that I would want. So initially I took that feedback really hard. And then and I can't say I did much within that first year to change that. But then it came up again in the next appraisal. We used to have a mid-year and an end-year appraisal, and it came back again. And I think that's the first time I sat and asked myself, perhaps there's some truth in there. Perhaps there's something that I need to look inwards and reflect, and look at how my behavior might be maybe motivating my team in a way that, that is not helpful. And I think for me, I learned pretty early that feedback is such a gift, because I worked on that feedback. And I can say that if I hadn't worked on that feedback, I probably would not have gotten to where I eventually did. Because all of us have blind spots, whatever they are. And for me, that was my blind spot. So I felt like I was driving results, and I felt like everybody should work the way I do. But I came to realize that people have different ways of doing things. I think it's important to be clear with the team on what your vision is, where you're going, and have a broad framework of how we'll achieve this, but also give people a bit of space to do things their way. And so that was very, very important. And especially as I grows on to more senior positions where you can't do everything, right?
Yeah.
And you really have to trust your team, paint a very clear vision of where you're going and what you want to achieve. But you have to trust your team to be able to deliver. So I learned that very early through feedback that was quite difficult for me to take initially. But I'm really grateful that I got that feedback at that time. And the boss that I had then also gave me the feedback in a way that, I wasn't being hammered,
Yeah.
but it was given in a way that would help and support me to grow.
All right. And it ended up helping you, obviously.
It was incredibly
So
helpful.
what adjustments did you make at that time to your leadership style?
For me, what I started doing was trying to be a bit more. I actually walked up to someone in my team and I told him, I think you're the one who gave this feedback about me, and I'm not here to bash you. And I told him I was not aware that this is how you felt. And I told him, if we're in a meeting or in a setup where, I say something and you think that's not something I should have said, or perhaps was too tough on someone, can you come immediately after that meeting and let me know, so that I start becoming aware of what being, too rough looks like? And he was very faithful. He was very, very faithful. And he'd come and say, Anne, you told someone this and this, and I think,
Tone it down.
yeah. No, and did you see how they reacted after? And sometimes I actually was completely not aware that I'd put someone down, because you never want to do that as a leader. You want your team to come up, you want ideas to bubble up, you want to really create a safe space where everyone feels that they can come and say, whatever they want to say. And so he was very faithful in giving me that feedback. And so I actually started then being more self-aware, seeing how sometimes, someone would say something that if I felt wasn't the right thing to say, I would give them feedback then, but that was not always useful or not in a way that would help them. So I started becoming aware of those situations, and I started toning down my language and giving feedback in a way that was more helpful to my team. And I remember, I think at the end of that year, the next year, I got voted as the best manager, in that department. And many of my team would come and say, Anne, you really listen, and we appreciate that you're tough, but that you give us feedback in a way that helps us improve. And that's a feedback I've gotten now over the years. But I would say that it came from me taking that first feedback and being self-aware and ready to change. Yeah.
Amazing. And not the ordinary. Because many people will take developmental feedback and shrink,
Right.
and feel like that was an attack on me as a person.
Yes.
But it sounded like you took it the other way around.
The first time I took it as an attack,
Oh,
right?
did.
Remember, I had to get this feedback twice
Mm.
to start thinking, okay, perhaps there's something here. And I think after how I changed, and my next appraisals were very different. We are seeing an amazing change in Anne. This is amazing. Then I started thinking that, feedback truly is a gift. And that's how I've always treated feedback. If anyone comes and tells me anything about myself, my first thought is not, you're attacking me, this is nonsense. Always try to investigate, is there some truth in this?
Yeah.
Could there be something here that I need to change?
And how can I use it to my advantage?
Yes, to my advantage, because ultimately as a leader, you want to be the most effective leader.
Yeah.
And we all have blind spots. We all have aspects of our personality that don't serve us.
Yeah.
And so being aware of them is really important, and mitigating those. We are still who we are, right?
Yeah.
But knowing who we are is really important, being self-aware and, toning down those aspects of ourselves that are not serving us.
Yes. And I think that's where 360 feedback is very useful.
Absolutely.
Because then you can get to see those blind spots and look at it and be like, oh, you mean that's me? Okay. So now you're deputy country director at CSI.
It was called the chief operating officer.
Yeah. Yeah. Then what's your next after that?
So from there, I moved to another organization called Thinkwell. And this is where I really went to pursue my passion in health financing. Because all through PS, I even tried in my former organization to start off some projects in health financing. It's still something that was very close to my heart. Work in government, I would see patients sell their land, their cows, their, all their property to access care. And sometimes it was still not enough. Someone would need a complex surgery, chemo, radio, which was not covered by the NHIF then. And I saw people going into a lot of financial catastrophe just to access care. And this was something that was very close to my heart. And so I moved to Thinkwell to be closer to efforts to address health financing challenges in Kenya. And so, there are very many projects that we implemented that I'm incredibly proud of. Worked at both the national and the county level. We supported development of many laws, for example, in the facility financing laws. We supported counties implement their health financing strategies, expand access, work very closely with the NHF at that time. There's a lot of work that I'm really, really proud of. 2 years into that role, I got promoted into a regional role as a regional director for East and Southern Africa. So pretty much taking these same skills, expertise, but on a broader base. And I think that's really where my passion for the continent came from, because I realized that we are struggling with pretty much the same challenges in Uganda, in Kenya, in Zambia. Our issues were not very different. And I also realized that there aren't many efforts to learn across board, right? Like Kenya could have been struggling with something that perhaps Zambia had addressed. And I realized that we weren't spending enough time, for South-South learning. But in my role, of course, Thinkwell was a global organization. We also had a whole Asia portfolio. We also interacted a lot with our Asia colleagues and learned a lot from countries, for example, such as Indonesia, Bangladesh, India. And I also realized that there's a lot that we weren't learning from one another. And there's a lot for, especially Africa, to learn from Asia, countries such as Indonesia, countries such as Thailand and so on. There's a lot for us to learn from one another. I'm still very committed to efforts on health financing reforms for the continent. I feel there's still a lot that can be done, especially the domestic resources. Last year, I think we saw a total disruption in the global financing architecture, right? And while, of course, it came as a shock, it's not what many people would have wanted. I think ultimately we've been talking about domestic financing for years, and the fact that Africa really needs to take charge of its health, take charge of our own problems, and do what works for us. So I think while that was a very painful thing for Africa to go through, in many ways it does provide us an opportunity to truly reset, to truly ask ourselves, what are our challenges, what are our priorities as Africa, and do things our way in a sustainable manner.
I'm really pleased to hear that. And I think for me, that is sustainable
Right.
development. Because I think the continent for the longest time has been walking around with a begging bowl,
Right.
and when you beg, really, there's no dignity in poverty, as he said. So, to your point about domestic resource financing being, a lever that African governments now have to really pick on. So, given the work that you've done at PSI, Think Well, how do you think that shift that happened last year, how do you think the work that you've done positioned Kenya and the continent for the shift that happened last year?
We'd already started doing quite a bit of work on domestic resource mobilization at both national and at county level, and also a lot of work on efficiency and strategic purchasing. In health financing terms, strategic purchasing is really about how we allocate the scarce resources that we have. It's not really about procurement, as many people would think. I think some of the things that were very clear to me in the course of my work was that there's quite a bit of inefficiency in the health sector. There are a lot of resources that we could spend better in very many ways. There are a lot of, so maybe if I'll just give you an example. If you look back traditionally at a lot of the programs that donors fund, it's typically around AIDS, HIV/AIDS, TB, malaria, a lot of communicable diseases. Yet, we've had this growing burden in non-communicable diseases, cancers, yes, hypertension, diabetes, respiratory diseases. But there's been very little focus on those. And yet there's so much that could be done to prevent some of these conditions, especially like, diabetes, hypertension, and so on. But there's very little of our resources that we are spending to do that. Yet, if you look at our total health expenditure as a country, we are seeing increasingly a lot of resources being spent on non-communicable diseases, mostly out of pocket. Because also, if you look at the social health insurance agencies, not a lot has also been spent on paying for care for these non-communicable diseases. And so there's a lot of, I think, there are a lot of lessons there around efficiency, around spending better on primary healthcare, for example. Curative care is important, yes, but we certainly get a bigger bang for the buck when we spend on primary healthcare. There are other sources of waste or inefficiency that we don't always see as they are. So if you look at most counties in Kenya, about 70% of the expenditure goes to human resources for health. That's a big chunk of the resources that we are spending. But we don't spend enough time to look at how we are actually spending this 70%. A number of studies have shown very high absenteeism rates, almost half, right? I won't go into the reasons why and why not and so on. But can we look at how we are spending our human resources better, the resources we are putting in, whether staff are where they need to be, are they well distributed, and so on. And also look at the split of resources between the bigger hospitals and primary healthcare facilities. So in many counties right now, you'll still find that most primary healthcare facilities, dispensaries, for example, only have 1 to 2 staff. Hospitals have, of course, a bigger, many more staff. But in comparison, then you find that the level of care we are offering at primary healthcare facilities may really not be of good quality just because they are really short-staffed. And so just looking at how we are, even without increasing the resources that we are spending, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done around efficiency.
Yeah. All right. And it sounds like all that work that you are doing, around the system,
Right.
prepared the country and the continent for the shift that happened last year and
Yes.
the reset. So going back to your career journey, it was a first rise, you can say, to a regional director role. What would you say are some things that contributed to you moving and growing career-wise as fast as you did?
I think one of the things I'll have to say is taking feedback and working on myself. But the other thing is also, preparing yourself for these roles. So I did that, for example, through accepting or volunteering to do a bit more. So, like, for example, would be asked, Anne, can you take on this? I would say, yes. Sometimes I would be scared, but I'd be like, yes. I remember when I was approached to take on the project director role for this big $42 million grant. And I was nervous because I hadn't done that before. And to be fair, I did require a bit of convincing by the CEO. But when I took it on, I think that also stretched me and exposed me to many other opportunities. So I would say being open to growth, but also preparing myself. So I did a number of leadership programs. I remember while I was still at PS Kenya, not in any health financing role, I took an advanced healthcare financing course that used to be offered by the WHO in Barcelona. And since that was not a program that, I was implementing in my organization, I had to pay for myself. But it's because I knew that I did want to pivot to health financing. And so when this other role came, this course that I'd done in Barcelona, paid for myself, that was expensive, but it positioned me. It positioned me for this other role. So I think some of the lessons then I've learned is that beyond saying that I want XYZ, we have to start doing the work, even if we cannot immediately see a path as to how we'll get to that role. I think starting to say, okay, I want to be, I don't know, an M&D officer, or I want to be the country director like Rose. What does it take to be a country director? What sort of skills do I need? Where do I need to polish up? How do I need to look like? Right? And then starting to prepare ourselves for those sorts of roles. So I took many leadership courses. Some was very lucky that my organization, sponsored, but some also sponsored myself for, and just sort of prepared myself to get there. I also sought out mentors who are people who were already where I wanted to go and would seek their advice. Yeah. But the other thing I would say is that, and I think this is really important, with the little that you're given, that you do it with excellence, because that is then what opens future doors. Because if you're given a small role, I started off as when I was working in the district. I was the head of initially I was just a medical officer, but I did that with such excellence, promoted to be the medical superintendent in charge of a level 4 hospital. And I did my very best, and then I was promoted to be the district medical officer of health. And in all these things, I think with a little position that you have, doing such levels of excellence, that, people can already start seeing you in your next role. But if you never act in a way that you look like your next role, then you'll probably just remain, where you are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that really resonates in that many people think the promotion will be handed to me,
Right.
on a silver platter. And because I have done 3 years or 4 years in an organization in a certain role, you're thinking the next one should be handed to me.
That is spot on. I remember, one of the members of my team coming and saying, Anne, I've been in this position for 5 years. I need a promotion. And I thought, and I told him, length of time is not a performance indicator.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not an indicator. So what have you done with these 5 years? We can't quite see you in this next position yet. So yeah, you're absolutely right. What you do with what you have.
What you do with what you have. But I heard you say also a very important point around preparing yourself ahead of time for the place where you want to go. So you want to read the right books, you want to do the right courses, you want to prepare yourself, you want to put your hand up.
Yes.
Responsibilities are given so that the next time there's another opportunity, then you are ready for it.
Absolutely.
Have there been, over this trajectory, have you had any difficult situations that you've dealt with or any setbacks, and how have you handled them? If you can give us a few.
Oh, for sure. For sure, I mean, in any leadership
Yeah.
journey, there are so many challenges that we face. Many for the very first time that you have to sort of, learn and navigate on the job. I think maybe some of the examples, maybe one example I can give. I remember I got promoted into a certain role that somebody else had interviewed for, and they felt that they were more deserving than I was, but I got offered the role eventually. And this person really tried to make my life difficult in this role because now they are now reporting into me. And that was something very difficult for them. But I think I stayed objective. I stayed very objective. I was very clear on what their deliverables were. And I would sort of just, deflect any side shows and be focused on these these are your deliverables. This is how I'm going to support you. What sort of support do you need from me? And I think just being objective and staying focused on the role. With time, I think this person saw that I'm really just focused on work. I'm not here to, really entertain the side shows and so on. And so they sort of, whipped themselves, into place. But yeah, I mean, for sure, we go through many challenges. I also in one of the organizations where I served, I also remember working with some colleagues, from the global north who, at that time, I felt that what they were doing was extractive, right? So would work on some work together. We collect the data and all that, we support, but then they want to publish things only on their own. You'll never see your name featuring anywhere. And so these are things that I brought up and I helped address how we used to deal with them as an organization. These are not fair practices. We have to be fair in how we treat one another, colleagues from the global north, and so on. And this is something that has always been very important to me anywhere that I work. That there is fair and equal treatment and recognition of the value that everybody, wherever they are, brings to the table, and fair recognition of that.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you stood up for
It's
yourself.
just my nature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So over this course, I'm starting to see the leader and emerging and the leadership style. What would you define as the leadership style that has transcended your career journey, and why have you adopted that as your leadership style?
Yeah. I would say my leadership style is transformative in the sense that people say I'm very results driven. And I'm usually very, very clear on the goal and the vision. And I'll paint that very clearly for my team. There's usually no confusion as to where we are going, right? But I'll really give people space to get to that goal as best as they see fit. I'm very supportive in the sense that I'll check in often. If there's a task that somebody is struggling with, I'll step in, I'll lean in and support you. But if you're also doing very well, then I'll step out. So I think that's really what I would say. I would say that I'm a transformational leader who gives people space to deliver, and that is very clear on the vision.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So earlier on, you had said that you have sought mentors
Yes.
on your journey. So
Yes.
do you feel like your mentors have influenced your adoption of that style or not?
I'm not sure I would say that in particular they have influenced that style. Maybe they have without me thinking about it, right? Because sometimes I would take challenges that I'm facing at work and I'd get advice on how to deal with them. And for sure, that by and by did influence my leadership style. So I would say yes. I think that would help me see another way of doing things, another way of approaching leadership, another way of addressing the challenges that I was going through. So yes, actually, I would say yes.
Okay.
Yes. I just hadn't thought about that before.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think what I'm hearing you say is that mentorship is critical.
Yes.
Courses are critical in preparing yourselves. Putting your hand up is important to take on extra responsibilities when they come. So looking back at the woman leader that you are, you've been multifaceted. As women leaders, we are multifaceted. We have we are leaders, but we are also mothers, we are wives, we are people in the society, we are friends and sisters and etc. So how has that shaped your career growth? And are there aspects that you've had to adjust to ensure that you're able to play your other roles effectively?
For sure. I think I would sum it and say we can have it all, but not at the same time. Not at the same time. So when I got married, I had my undergrad at that time, and I was very clear that I wanted to do my master's out of the country. And so this is something that I had discussed with my husband before we got married. And we'd agreed that we'll have to postpone our family so that I do my master's because I was not going to carry or leave a small baby behind. So these are some of the things I had to do. I had to postpone. So our children came 4 years later. And you can imagine what that looks like, in Africa.
Yeah.
Because I went out of the country, I did my master's, I was offered a job in the university where I was working after that. So I took that on for a while. So I had to pause and postpone my family. And when I came back and I was now ready to, for us to start our family, I remember thinking, we wanted to have our children in quick succession. And I knew that for the next 5 or so years, my career growth will be very limited. That's really, I'm not trying to move anywhere else. I'll just focus where I am because I have to, bring up my family. So I was not trying to look for big positions, move and so on. But I think God was so faithful and graceful because where I was, I remember I got 2 jobs heavily pregnant. In fact, I remember I did my interview for the deputy country director. I did the interview on a Thursday and I was delivering on a Monday. And I was given the news that I got the job, while I was on maternity leave, like a week or two into my cesarean section. So I still grew a lot, but I had not planned for that growth because I knew now my kids are small. There are many things that will have to take a back seat as I focus on my family. And I remember I'd be invited into many, like board positions. I was invited to support as a certain group that was very keen to be part of, but they used to meet every single week. I remember wanting to join Rotary, but at that time they used to meet every single week as well. And I did not want to take any commitments that were, like a routine weekly commitment when I had young children. So there are many things that I said, I cannot be part of this right now because my focus will be on my work and my family, and I really don't have bandwidth for anything else. But as my children grew up, then I've taken on, board positions, advisory roles, other things that require a bit more of my time because I feel now I'm in a position to be able to do that. So I think being aware of the season that you're in as a woman is really important. And being clear about what's your priority in that moment. So that, you're not just running around and doing a bit of everything not well. Because that your family is suffering, your work is suffering, all these other things are suffering as well. I also wasn't able to serve or take on leadership positions in church at that time because my children were small and you know how busy work can be. I mean, church can also get. So these were clear decisions that I made. I'm just doing my full-time job. I'm not doing any consultancies or anything like that on the side in my family.
Amazing. I'm hearing you saying that being ruthlessly careful with how you choose in your seasons is very critical because when you don't spread yourself too thin or become resentful.
Absolutely.
Because you're being pulled in different directions.
Absolutely.
All right. And maybe if you can speak a bit more about the spaces you have found yourself in, especially as a health financing specialist, it's rather male dominated, right? And I mean, the spaces that we play in are very male dominated. You have had to hold your space with very senior, government officials, donor agency officials, etc. What are some tools that have helped you to stay to take your space in those places and in those boardrooms?
I think for me, one of the things I think has paid off is being prepared, right? So if I'm walking into a certain meeting, I've done my work and I have my facts and figures. And so even if the discussions are moving in a direction that maybe that's not what I've wished to see. Speaking up with data, with evidence, like knowing your stuff, and speaking up and not being scared or intimidated to give a contrary position when the whole room is moving in a certain side. If you have your facts, your figures, and you're clear and your heart is in the right place, speaking up boldly because I have the evidence backing me, and to have that data, then again, it goes back to the excellence that I was speaking about, right? Knowing your stuff. And when you know your stuff, then you're more confident to speak it up, even if everybody's against you. Evidence doesn't lie. Yeah.
No, I love that. I love that you don't have to shrink yourself.
You don't have
Just
to
have the
shrink yourself.
facts.
Yes.
Yeah.
But to be honest, there's also many times you have to speak to yourself.
Yeah.
I've been in rooms where you're feeling nervous. I am feeling nervous to speak up, and I'm thinking, wow, there's this senior person in the room and that other senior person in the room, and then one thing that I've always told myself, that there's a reason that I'm in this room, and so sometimes there's a little self-talk going on behind, before I speak up. And so with time, then it's become much easier because you'll say something and then that might be what is adopted. And you're like, wow, I'm glad I did speak up. So the more of such experiences you have, the more confident they help you become, or they help me become. And so now I'm not sure there's any room, to be honest, that would make me nervous right now. Even if I walked into whatever room with whichever presidents and so on, I think because of the experience that I've had, I trust myself and I trust my mind. Yeah.
And the
I
experience
trust
has
my mind.
prepared you.
Exactly.
All right. So it sounds like positive self-talk, especially for those that are beginning their management and leadership journey, is a very critical practice. To just remind yourself there's a reason why you're there.
Yes.
And it was merit-based.
Absolutely.
It was not a token.
Yeah.
All right. Maybe let's pivot a bit and talk about the change that happened last year. In the donor funding landscape. How did that affect you, and what has happened around you from that time?
Yes. So, I mean, this affected the entire development sector, not just in Kenya, but globally. The organization that I was working in certainly took a hit as well. A number of people had to leave. And I think for me, I'd been in that space for about an year where I was thinking, what do I want to do next as Anne? What's my next move going to look like? I think I'd also started realizing that with this policy work, sometimes your hands are made and the policies you make are only as good as the government of the day and what the intentions are. And so I'd actually been in this reflective space. And so for me, the changes that came last year it really was the best point for me to pull back and say, this is really my time to step aside as Anne and reflect and really think about what I want for myself moving forward. I'm somebody who's really driven by purpose. And if I'm in a space where I'm not clear what sort of impact I'm making, then I typically would step away from that space. And so I really needed to be in a place where I sort of found my purpose again and thought about how I wanted to contribute moving forward. And it's been about 4 months now. It's been a very, very interesting season because I'd never ever taken a break. You go to school and it's just back to back different roles. So it's been a very nice and reflective season. And I've tried to expose myself to all sorts of different things, even outside of the health sector. So I'll go for a conference on agriculture. Basically, I'm just trying to feed my mind with all sorts of different things. And out of these, hopefully my purpose, my inspiration as to my next direction will come. But I've also been, engaged in various consultancies. People will call me up and we think you can do this for us. Are you interested? So I wasn't keen last year. I really needed a bit of a break. But in the last few months, I've been able to take on a few such roles. As I really think about what I want for myself for the future, Africa is top of the list. I know I want to continue making an impact on the continent. I want to continue being part of efforts on sustainable development, sustainable health system strengthening, sustainable financing. So this is something that is very close to me. I'm also really keen on local manufacturing. A lot of the medical supplies and many other supplies that we consume on the continent are imported from Asia. Yet, if you look at the population of our youth who are jobless, that's many. So I'm basically I'm thinking broader
Yeah.
than what I was doing before. And I know that whatever role I step into as I move forward, whether it's something that I'll be doing myself is unlimited, whether it's another role that I'll step into, these are the sorts of things that I'm thinking about.
All right. So it sounds like it's been a gift for you.
It has. It's been a gift.
You've taken time to reflect on Anne.
Yeah. I've taken time to think about Anne, to look at Anne from outside and to expose myself to all sorts of different things and different interactions. Of course, it's also been really awesome for my children, spending a bit more time with them. And, them coming from school and finding mom at home has been really special. But also, it's also given me time to serve more fully in the boards. I serve on 3 boards right now. So I've been able to really give of myself. And some of them have been in really busy seasons where they need us to meet a bit more frequently, take on a few more roles. And I've been able to do that. I wouldn't have been able to do that before. But I've also been in a season where I have family members who are close to me who've been unwell. So I've also been able to walk with them through this journey. So it's in many ways it's it's been a godsend. Yes.
Okay. Has there been any grief at all?
No, not at
There
all.
hasn't.
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at
That's amazing. And that resilience starts to emerge from that story, that it's not, even when a reset is forced,
Yes.
you can work around it. So if you're to look at the Anne that was managing a level 4 facility
Yes.
many years ago, what would you tell that girl, especially about career journey? What words would you have for her?
I would tell her that to be open to all sorts of experiences, to say yes, even when she's not sure that she can actually do it. Because more often than not, it's in the doing that you become, it's in the doing that you learn, it's in the doing that you know what you're fully capable of, right? I had to manage a level 4 hospital to know that I can actually do that. You will not be given a role because you've done it before. So I would say to say yes. There's this book by Rhonda on her year of yes, and just saying yes and being open to all sorts of opportunities, and to feel the fear and do it anyway. Women typically have imposter syndrome. I used to think it's something that I alone had, but in my discussions with many other senior women, people will tell you, someone that you really look up to, and then you'll hear that this person was scared. This person did not really fully believe that they belonged in the space that they were in, or at the table that they had been invited to. So I've come to realize it's something that many women struggle with. And so to be aware that yes, we'll sit at tables that we ask ourselves, what are we doing on this table? But just to feel all that fear and speak up anyway, and realize that there's a reason that you're there, and say yes.
Okay. To do it afraid.
Do it afraid.
Okay. Going into your next chapter,
Yes.
what can we expect to see in that chapter? I know you've said you've had a lot of exploration, you've looked at many different interests, you've considered things you haven't considered before. What can we expect to see?
We can certainly expect to see the same Anne, in the sense of the Anne who is driven by purpose, who is driven by impact, but an Anne who really wants to focus on the continent, on the African continent, of course in Kenya, my home country, but I'm really keen on the continent. And I'm keen on sustainable solutions that are homegrown. So things that we can build on over years, and not necessarily solutions that are grown up somewhere else and will only serve us for 2-3 years, and 3 years later we are back where we started. So yeah, I'll keep it that broad.
Yeah.
Because that's really where my mind is right now.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love the fact that it's for us who've been given the positions of leadership that we have, you know how the Bible says to him, who a lot is given, a lot is
What is
expected.
expected?
So a lot is expected of us,
Yes.
even as leaders in Kenya and Africa, to give back and to make it sustainable. So that will not imply in solutions that are here today and tomorrow they are not.
Actually, the other thing I would add is also an Anne who wants to give back a lot more. I've been very challenged actually in this season, this past 6 months or so. I've spent a bit more time with people who serve a lot in different spaces, whether it's in church, whether it's in the community where I live. People who truly give of themselves. Like these are senior people with busy jobs, but they give so much of themselves for the benefit of community and so on. I've been really challenged, and so I think the Anne that you'll also see in this new chapter is someone who is willing to serve much more without necessarily reward, at least not reward in the sense that we see it, as humans. But yeah, willing to give a lot more because so much has been poured into me.
Yeah.
I want to give back a lot more.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is there anything we haven't discussed you'd like for us to have discussed?
No, I don't think so. I think we've covered it.
Mm.
Yeah, and I'm happy to come back for another
conversation. It's been amazing having this conversation with you and getting to know you more. There are things I have learned about you in this conversation.
Yeah.
So it's been delightful and I've
Thank
enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having
And all
me,
the
Rose.
best on your next chapter.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.